I'm definitely more paranoid than I was when I first entered the industry, that my phone call could be published on the internet.
How do you keep up with all the content, talking on 7 different platforms a day and shifting as views? How do you keep up with all that?
I mean,
there's this other movement of trying to beat out the media when there's a negative piece on them. So a good example is Brian Johnson. How does that change how you guys think about covering these stories?
I can see why people do it. I think if we're good at our jobs, it shouldn't undermine that. There's still a good story to be told.
If you are an earlier stage company, how can they be covered by both of your publications?
if you're a smaller company, I think you really need to lean into the tension that you are dealing with. And so
One of the other models that some of the VCs are going after is podcasting. And is that a strategy we'll continue to see in venture?
I think it's a really interesting challenge for us as journalists of how you kind of... Thanks, everybody.
Hello. First panel. All right. Nice to meet you guys. I'm Sally Shin, like JJ said. Delighted to have this panel. I was just talking to Natasha about the fact that I've read her byline so many times, but I've actually never met her. So it's been great to get to know both of you guys. Maybe just to start off, before we get into the ways that you cover venture capital industry, what's the big theme in venture capital today? I feel like every mega fund is just growing bigger and bigger. There's roll-ups at every other venture capital industry. What's the biggest topic for you guys in terms of themes?
Yeah, hi everyone, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. I've been a VC reporter for 7 years. This feels like the best year to be a venture capital reporter because, like you said, there's this massive growth of mega funds and a lot of questions about what they're going to do in this exit environment or lack thereof of an exit environment, really clashing into the AI boom. And so I feel like there's never been more money at stake, more innovation coming all throughout San Francisco and globally. So, I mean, for me, I'm just trying to make sense of it all still. How are we actually going to get returns? And what are the important power stories to tell?
Yeah, I would second that. I mean, AI, definitely the big theme. I moved here 2.5 years ago and less long on the beat than you, Natasha. But just before I moved, the job was pitched as a kind of crypto and fintech job. Go and do VC, this will be the interesting story. I turned up in January 2023 and have only really written about AI startups ever since. Along with that, I think the institutionalization of VC, this kind of, growth into mega funds, but also diversification of what the model actually is, and I think we'll touch on some of that later in the panel, as well as, so that kind of that boom aspect, and then there's also the ongoing bust. The companies in 2021 and 2022 that raised the valuations that they can't grow into. That remains an interesting story. So there's so many things happening simultaneously.
Yeah, and you had a scoop this morning about XAI. Everyone should check it out at the on the FT site. Maybe just on the fund side, you had the mega funds like I mentioned, but then there's also the emerging funds. We saw a deluge of emerging funds the last few years, and then there might be some cracks in that with fundraising now, but at the same time, all these GPs are leaving and starting new funds. Maybe the question for you guys is, when funds are launching, it's very easy for them to talk to you guys, but when you're trying to really understand what's going on underneath it all, how do you get these fund managers to talk about these stories when times are tough?
I mean, these are the same people that get tapped to be scouts for some of the biggest funds and most important investors, if they're not already one of those important investors, now trying to strike out on their own. So I think really leaning into the tension that they have to navigate has been helpful for me when I'm interviewing them. There's a reason that they're leaving Andreessen Horowitz, trying to raise funding for a new fund in an insane environment for emerging VCs. So I really try and dig into what helps them win deals. Maybe that's as simple as like a new thesis on what's interesting in AI these days. But another way that emerging managers have really come onto my radar is they have this really radical belief on what VC is doing wrong today. And so having that conversation can be really helpful.
And what are they doing wrong?
I mean, everyone likes to point fingers, right? Like the mega funds will point at the emerging VCs, the emerging VCs will point at the mega funds and everyone in between. But I mean, one immediate thought I have is smaller fund sizes are getting more in vogue, or more consistent fund sizes. And so it's not just an asset allocation game, especially in an environment where folks are struggling to exit for huge multiples. So I find one thing to really be interesting to write about is this more conservative side of VC, or as George mentioned, as VC kind of rethinks its models, what are some new products we'll see? Like, is there a general catalyst-like approach coming at smaller VC funds? That's something I wrote about recently too.
And maybe also because it is a media summit, one of the other models that some of the VCs are going after is podcasting. And I'll mention like Eric Torenberg has Turpentine Media, which got acquired or acqui-hired by Andreessen. Is that a strategy we'll continue to see in venture? Is it just a marketing scheme? Is it an ego thing? Is it more than that? Is it for deal flow? Like, what are you seeing in that space?
I think we will see more of it. I mean, I think you need some pretty serious scale to put it off, and Andreessen have obviously been the kind of pioneers in that space. But yeah, I think there's now so many more, direct to podcasts, whether you're doing that out of your own VC firm or through a kind of more friendly media outlet. And I think it's a really interesting challenge for us as journalists of how you kind of, you don't forego your criticality to meet people in that space, but you also offer something that people are going to want to talk about. And to your point, Natasha, about how you kind of, how do you approach different VCs and try and get interested in their thesis, I think that it makes that challenge a bit harder. When you have a 3-hour podcast that someone could do as an alternative to getting interrogated by me for 30 minutes, and then I write it up in the style that I want, that's a pretty hard sell. So yeah, I think we have to be conscious of it.
And maybe just transitioning to how you guys cover the startup world. Like I mentioned, George, you had a story today about XAI and its tender offer. Now, because there's so many deals coming through the AI world, I feel like Perplexity is raising every 3 months. The big question I still get is, how do I get the attention of the information or the FT? How are you guys sourcing or picking companies to cover? And if you are an earlier stage company, how can they be covered by both of your publications?
Go first. I think for the information, it's quite simple. It's, are we breaking news as there's this level of exclusivity, and does it connect to a broader theme? Sometimes that's really volume of dollars for a deal. And so yeah, whenever Perplexity raises, we want to break that news. Whenever XAI raises, we want to break that news. If you're a smaller company, I think you really need to lean into the tension that you are dealing with. And so the best example in recent news that I believe some of you tweeted about was Every launched its media and AI company and got this amazing New York Times story. And I thought what Dan Schipper did really well, and what I wrote about the following week in my column after talking to him, was emphasizing what's different about the way that they are building that company today. And I would never write about a $2 million seed round, but I wrote about his because he had a really unique way he was viewing actually raising capital in a responsible way. So I always say, like, for smaller companies, if you can talk about what you're doing differently, even from like a how to build this startup in 2025, like no detail is too incremental. That's obviously, like, for us at The Information, not every publication sees it that way, but it has to have a level of exclusivity and tension.
For the FT, I think it's anything but simple. But yeah, we have all of the above. I think exclusivity is obviously the major one. And then, I mean, there's components of our audience that mean we go for specific stories. And I think there's probably three here. One is it European? That's always going to be very interesting. We love Mistral as well as all of the other bigger AI companies.
You're at the FT, or just generally you're interested in this?
We're interested in them, yeah. As in, can there be a European champion for AI? That is the kind of story that FT readers absolutely love. A ton of our readership work in big financial institutions, so we would do a smaller funding round for a company that, for instance, we did one recently where they're disrupting financial analysts. If that's our readers, they're going to want to read about it. So there's always, there's the velocity of fundraising. You mentioned Perplexity. There's the scale of fundraising. XAI obviously comes into that bracket. But then there are some more kind of marginal ones which we will pick up if it attaches to an interesting theme, an interesting geography, and definitely exclusivity is like the key.
And I'll add to that, like another theme that's been interesting these days is like actual moonshots that are like launching. Those are companies that are started by researchers, are really either going to win or really going to lose, and that tension is fascinating to cover and is definitely a byproduct of this crazy environment.
And how are you scouting those stories? Are they coming to you, and should those that are thinking about doing a fundraise and announcing a fundraise 3 months from now start a relationship with you guys? How does that process work for you guys at the moment?
I probably have not worked with like an embargo more than 3-4 times in my 2 years at the information. So I feel like a lot of it is really coming from sources and tips on an interesting PhD that's starting a new company, and then it's on us to kind of confirm the news. And part of that is, it's like that we want to write about it sooner than they want to tell the full story. So that's something for us to navigate. But I'm curious how you guys work with.
Yeah, very, very similar. I mean, I think it's probably 80% of the conversations I have don't result in a story, at least immediately, but you hope that they slow burn into something down the line. And that will be, you have an introduction, there's not news at the moment, or the funding round is not big enough, it's an A, and we probably need it to be a C. But then at the point that comes along, you have the relationship, and you break the funding story, or you write the kind of full profile. So I think for us, it's a slightly slower burn, and it goes back to this point of like, there isn't a hard and fast rule for the FT. It's not, we'll write this scale, we'll write this thing. It's kind of, do the stars align? Do you have capacity? Is the story interesting enough? Do you have the relationship? And if it all falls into place, then great.
And has the way that you approach breaking news differed? Because a lot of your colleagues have now started their own newsletters, like Eric Newcomer, there's Casey Newton, Alex Conrad from Forbes just launched his new company. You guys are more of a legacy media at this point. Information's still new, but now I'm going to put you in the category of the legacy media.
That's a compliment.
And you guys have a lot more checks and balances versus one reporter breaking a story, and they need the volume of stories to get through to maintain the subscription. So has that changed the way you guys approach stories, publish stories? Maybe it's not a full baked story, but you want to get it out because you don't want to get scooped by Eric Newcomer.
Yeah, I think competition is like very healthy for our beat, and the best part about the VC beat is like there's so many stories to tell. But yes, definitely I'm publishing even faster. It gives us more of an itch to publish and then update with more details as we go.
Yeah, and we're a little slower, to be perfectly honest. I mean, I think our bar is high, obviously, and it's incredibly competitive. So I think the FT is brilliant at many things. Being the first out the door is not always the chief among them. We do get a lot of scoops, but not as many as we'd like.
But yeah, we're always thinking about the FT when we have a deal tip. So I wouldn't totally believe George.
And a lot of these like mega AI companies, when you guys approach it, how do you work with your colleagues on that? Because again, like going back to some of the independents that are tackling the story from one angle, you guys are, I assume, collaborating with your AI team and your VC reporting team. How do you guys collaborate on that, and how do you guys like share information? Or you don't, maybe.
No, I mean, it's such a generalist beat, so you definitely need to bring in industry experts, and I feel like the VC beat has always been this beat that brings in people from other teams, so nothing extremely new there beyond AI is much more technical than many people, including me, understand at all times, and so I'm often reading, Sharon from Bloomberg or Alex Heath, and making sure I understand the core technology, and then obviously collaborating a lot internally too with people like our AI team who are, the foremost experts on OpenAI, and I maybe don't know the latest internal drama there at all times.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. I mean, I think the complexity around AI, the complexity around OpenAI's corporate structure in particular, like these are things where you want to bring in experts, and we have quite a simple division at the FT. I cover the kind of money into companies, and my colleague Christina covers the technology inside the AI companies. So we are quite a good double act and don't tend to tread on each other's toes too much because they're quite clearly delineated.
Maybe going back to the mega funds itself, and we mentioned at the top about these roll-ups we're seeing, the change in the fund structure of General Catalyst, Thrive. Is that going to continue with other funds, you think? Or do you think that this is going to be a bifurcation of, these one strategy with venture capital, and then maybe a strategy that like Benchmark decides to keep is a much smaller fund? And how do the VCs compete in this space right now?
You've written more about this than I have, so I'll have a first stab at the answer and hope that you can fill in the gaps. But I I think we'll see more of it for sure. It's been, I mean, the roll-ups is the kind of newest phenomenon, and there's various funds doing that. General Catalyst, I think, first out the gate, although I might get told off by Thrive representatives in the room. And I think we will see more, but you need obviously pretty substantial scale to do that. You need to be an RIA. So not everyone can do it. And I think it speaks to, I mean, a diversification of what venture, quote unquote, is, but probably a bifurcation as well. And I think we're seeing earlier stage funds being set up by these emerging managers. I think that's still a very valid business model. And then you're seeing these kind of all singing, all dancing, like financial institutions at this point who are doing continuation funds, roll-ups, early stage VC, growth stage VC. And I think there will be a group of those who play at that scale, but you need scale to do it, so it's not for everyone. But I think it's like, aside from AI, the most interesting thing in venture at the moment.
Totally. I still think about this amazing headline from Forbes in its Hammond profile from last week, I want to say, from the Midas list, which was just like venture capitalized. And that might be too niche, but I like absolutely loved it because I feel like that defines like what I'm focused on this year, like VC's upheaval, how it manages needing to reinvent itself in real time, also win deals, also not be thought of as just a venture capital investor with money, but all these different services. And while GC has been like a really interesting shift to wanting to be seen more like a company, I'm seeing smaller firms differentiate that way too. A lot of the spin-outs I'm covering are leaving their firms because they disagree with the idea of maybe going after everything all at once. Maybe for them, like their version of being venture capitalized is investing in roll-ups, or it's being more honest about secondaries and the role it needs to play in actually distributing money back to their investors. And so I always appreciate when there's like that level of honesty on how the business has actually changed, because similar to like how media has changed, VC has changed so dramatically, and there needs to be probably some business model realignment.
Maybe another format that is starting to emerge, this is, I want to call it the all-in 2.0, which is the Technology Brothers, or
They're great.
TBPN. I always fuck up the acronym, but one, I'm curious what you guys think about it. And then two, there's just so many outlets that a lot of the sources that you talk to talk on various platforms. So my real question is, like, how do you keep up with all the content that all the, the Mark Andreessen talking on 7 different platforms a day and shifting his views? How do you keep up with all of that?
I'm so happy to see what they're doing, because people who would never sit down with either of us are sitting down there. And so like as a venture nerd, very much enjoying the look into Andreessen's LP day, or seeing that kind of interview format play out, even if it's not the same exact questions we would always ask. I think it's healthy. I mean, I want to be covering this in like 20 years, so I have to see this only as a positive, that we're seeing more creative methods of getting news out show up. Like, if anything, I think it creates a little bit more honesty in the ecosystem at times, and awareness that journalists actually have a huge role to play in accountability consistently. And I feel like I have to assume that when people watch that podcast versus read an information story or an FT story, they know there's a difference in the motives, the thought process, the types of questions. If you share questions beforehand, I don't know about that podcast specifically, but I feel like there is something to be said about like authentic, independent journalism, and so that's what I'm betting on long term.
Yeah, I would love to just nod along to that, because it's a very optimistic view, and I think it's like hopefully the right one. But it makes our job a lot harder. It's like, I think they're great. I mean, like the Technology Brothers in particular, I think excellent. Like these podcasts are wonderful. My editors in London are like, this is incomprehensible. Can you watch this, turn it into something which a reader in London or Brussels or anywhere else in the world might understand? So that's a part of my job, which I guess is like a little bit different between the two of us. So that's one part of it. But I think there is a crucial role in holding power to account, and I think having this kind of proliferation of podcasts, direct to consumer things, they are amazing for us to sit and watch. But I think they do make it a little bit harder for us to get the kind of access that we might want. It definitely changes the power dynamic, and that's possibly a reflection of the fact that we've had all the cards for a long time in journalism, and now it's like we're seeing people have other options and they're choosing to use them. We have to be responsive to that and clever about how we do it.
Yeah, I almost feel like going direct, if you're not going to say anything interesting anyways, is fine to me, right? Like, I'm
Would
okay
definitely
saying
agree
no
with
to
that.
those interviews.
Yeah.
I think we both are. Like, we wouldn't publish it. So, like, the 80% of conversations that go nowhere, I'm like, do that.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. I think so. There's been one of my early experiences here was like, I think it was Jason Calacanis. It was one of the guys on the All In had like made some incendiary comment on X or publicly somewhere. So I went to him for comment. I was like, I'm writing this piece. I want to get a fuller reflection of your views, like, you know, a very kind of decent approach. And he was like, well, listen to the pod. And I was like, okay, sure. And then he was like, and make sure that, you know, like anything you quote me on, I will like publish this on my Substack. And I was just like, this wasn't really a gotcha moment. This was me asking you for like a sincere comment. And I think when it changes the stakes like that, and it's just like, you know, we are not just like subverted, but we're distrusted. I think that's when it poses a bit of a problem. But yeah, I totally agree with you. Like if it's just a talking shop, fine.
Yeah, and maybe another, staying on this theme of going direct, there's this other movement of trying to beat out the media when there's a negative piece on them. So a good example is Brian Johnson, who before the New York Times, well, he found out the New York Times was working on a story against him, and so it decided to pre-publish or get ahead of it, as he said. I think it's a biased question for me to ask, like, is that the right strategy? Because you guys probably want to get ahead of it, but how does that change how you guys think about covering these stories?
I'm definitely more paranoid than I was when I first entered the industry, that my phone call could be published on the internet. My DM, Jason Calacanis posted my DM on X once when it was just a very simple question. So yeah, a lot more paranoid for the way that you frame that initial email. But in the case of Brian Johnson, I mean, even in the case of, I think the most recent tweet from like Sam Altman about the 3 books about him, and the third book is, or like, yeah, like everyone's reading the third book now for sure. So stuff like that, I'm like, it draws attention to something that maybe you didn't want to draw attention to, but all the comms people in the room probably have a much smarter take on the negatives of putting your statement out ahead of time.
Yeah, again, agreed. I think I can see why people do it. I think if we're good at our jobs, it shouldn't undermine that. There's still a good story to be told. But yeah, I would definitely agree. I mean, I think it's like, it has felt increasingly combative, and you know, stuff like the JCal interaction definitely speaks to that. But yeah, with sources now, it's a lot more kind of cut and thrust. And I think particularly since the election last year, that has increased. Like there is a public narrative about media being the enemy. And I think if you're minded that way, it's a lot easier to be aggressive and to kind of, quote whatever. But look, we have a responsibility to do our jobs ethically and try and do them well. And I don't think it changes because you're getting scrutiny.
I think I'm almost out of time. So one quick last question. Compared to 5 years ago when you talk to your sources now, IPO market is starting to open up a little bit. You're seeing, companies being funded. Are people more optimistic or less optimistic than 5 years ago?
About the exit environment?
Yeah.
What do you think?
Exactly the same. It's always been in 1 quarter or 2 quarters. Genuinely, it hasn't changed. Like, I think, like, the window's always open. No one wants to go through it. Like,
I think that's a great way to end. So thank you both for this panel, and thank you to the audience.